Welcome to a special Legal AF. Adam Klasfeld, Allrise News, is going to join me. And we got some amazing news. You're going to hear a lot in the coming months and years about this Department of Justice and motions to dismiss for vindictive prosecution. It just goes with the territory of Pam Bondi being the head of the Department of Justice and Donald Trump calling the shots. It's not going to be the only one. We're going to probably get one filed eventually at some point by somebody like Senator Adam Schiff or Letitia James, a New York Attorney General, or maybe Barack Obama, or maybe Bill Clinton, or maybe everybody who's a Democrat that the weaponized Department of Justice is going after. But the first motion to dismiss for selective and vindictive prosecution under Rule 12 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure has been filed by Kilmar Abrego Garcia. You remember him. He's the guy that was a Maryland father of a couple of kids, married to a U.S. citizen here legally, working legally, and suddenly got loaded onto a plane with 200 other men and sent to El Salvador, where he was tortured and beaten. And then a judge stepped in. And we have now two judges in two different jurisdictions who are addressing the issues related to our Abrego Garcia. But he could be out this week, and I want Adam Klasfeld to come on and brief our audience about what's happening with the motion in front of Judge Crenshaw in Tennessee and what we can expect over the next 72 hours. Hi, Adam.
Hi, how's it going, Michael?
It's going great. So you spotted it on the docket. Judge, why don't you tell everybody, sort of, to remind them of Armando Abrego Garcia, or Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland jurisdiction that's been exerted by Judge Zinnes over the constitutional violations, his due process rights, the criminal indictment that was filed, phony manufactured indictment by the Department of Justice in Tennessee about something that happened several years ago, and Judge Crenshaw handling matters there. You know, we've got ICE, we've got federal marshals. Walk us through what's happening here.
So, as you said, Michael, there are two different cases running in parallel tracks. The indictment happening in the Middle District of Tennessee, where Kilmar Abrego Garcia has filed this motion for selective and vindictive prosecution, saying that this is payback. And there's a poignant quote in the papers saying that he's being prosecuted because he had the audacity to fight back. And that goes to the other parallel track, the civil lawsuit that was fighting his being whisked out of the country against a court order and dumped into a dangerous prison in El Salvador where he was tortured. And so the crux of this motion for selective and vindictive prosecution says that all of this is happening to him, that the government revives this investigation. And let me go into the weeds here because the timing is important. After the Supreme Court orders the government to send him back, that to facilitate his return, a couple of weeks after, this new criminal investigation starts up. And the investigation relates to a 2022 traffic stop. Now, when you go into the motion, the attorneys for Mr. Abrego look into every case of smuggling. Now, let me go back to the traffic stop. In 2022, he's stopped in Tennessee in an SUV with 9 people. The police look into it. They bring the case to federal authorities. They don't see anything. They let him go without even a speeding ticket. 3 years later, after the Trump administration is totally embarrassed by the Supreme Court and has to bring him back from CCOT, this dangerous prison in El Salvador, suddenly an investigation crops up into that 2022 traffic stop, and they have an indictment weeks later based on cooperating witnesses who are both convicted felons, one of whom has been deported from the country 5 times. And on the day of Kilmar Abrego Garcia's indictment, the chief of the criminal division of the Middle District of Tennessee spontaneously resigns, with reports saying that he believes the case was brought for political reasons. And oh, by the way, now joining Kilmar Abrego Garcia's legal team is that person's former deputy, Ratzko Dean.
So stop right there. Take a breath right there. So in the motion that we'll be talking about here, and also we're going to do something on live Substack, there is a number of people that make an appearance, as you would expect from a well-written motion like this. One is Allrise News, who was the DOJ, one of the heads of their Immigration Litigation Bureau division, who not only got fired for telling the truth to Judge Zinnes about Abrego Garcia's status, that there was an error. It was illegal for him to be removed to El Salvador because he had an order of non-removal because of violence that he could be subjected to if he was returned to his home country. But he also, prepared a 27-page whistleblower letter, and that is mentioned about the courage of Allrise News, who got effectively fired and dashed his career because he stood up for what was right about him. They apparently got some emails in discovery that they were able to also put into the motion, showing that the Department of Justice instantly had egg on their face and realized it about the illegal deportation. And that then allows them to make this great argument, which they have to make for vindictive prosecution, which is a hard thing to dismiss an indictment under, as they acknowledge. But I think they got the facts, which is after that happened, the retribution and vindictiveness campaigns started. And they're able, because of Pam Bondi, and she won't shut up because she's a political hack for Donald Trump. She says things along with other senior DOJ officials out loud about Abrego Garcia. Remember, in our country, Department of Justice, you are presumed innocent until you are proven guilty. And you are not supposed to go into the public and call the guy a wife beater, a human trafficker, a smuggler, an MS-13 gangbanger. You're not supposed, your indictment is either rises and falls on what your evidence you have, and you have prosecutorial requirements under ethics, under the DOJ manual, under the rules, not to abuse your prosecutor power because you want to go after somebody that you think's a gangbanger or a wife beater. Right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. And throughout this motion, I'm sure you saw this too, Popok, there are footnotes throughout the order pointing out the press conferences, pointing out all of the Fox News segments where people like Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem as Homeland Security Secretary.
Garbage, trash. Right.
Yeah. And Todd Blanche going out there. One of the things they need to prove for vindictive prosecution is that the case was brought because of this payback for his exercising of his rights. And you have Todd Blanche suggesting, because the judge questioned the case, we're bringing our own. And that they're pointing out those clips. We can put some of those clips perhaps in this segment to show people some of the statements that we're talking about. Usually the government doesn't hand this motion on a silver platter. Right. We remember when Trump tried to and failed to attack his criminal cases as being selective and being vindictive. There weren't statements like this because usually, as you said, the government doesn't make these sort of statements because
Jack Smith, right? Jack Smith didn't get up and only when he filed an indictment, and then he only stayed to what was in the indictment. He never made gratuitous press conferences or social media attacks on Donald Trump or anybody else. Say what you want about Merrick Garland, but he didn't talk a lot. He would only talk when he had an indictment or an arrest or an investigation or an appointment of a special counsel. And even then, he wouldn't talk about the person. He wouldn't try to convict them in the court of public opinion. And so this is what happens. And this is why it will be successful for somebody like Senator Schiff or Attorney General AG Letitia James or others, because vindictive prosecution is a real thing embedded in the rules of criminal procedure and in our constitutional precedent and law. And we're going to now see how one judge, with the very first one, I believe, that's been filed against the Trump administration, how that judge is going to rule on that this week. Talk to the audience about this really weird thing that could happen on Friday as well with his being free.
Well, what's happening on Friday is that a stay of his release. Now, remember, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was ordered released on bail, but that order has been paused because the federal government has all but promised to try to detain him in immigration authority and deport him there. So on Friday, the stay that was pausing his release is set to expire. Kilmar Garcia's legal team has said, yes, let it expire and let him be immediately released on Friday, but with a couple of conditions. One, give him 48 hours to return to Maryland, as a different federal judge in Maryland has ordered that he be allowed to return to that state where he is going to await trial under an order of supervision from ICE in Baltimore. Now, he will have 48 hours before ICE in Baltimore might make whatever moves they might make. But because of and thanks to that other federal judge's order, Kilmar Abrego Garcia will have notice. This won't be another, or the plan behind that federal judge's order is to avoid another situation where he's whisked away in the dead of night and the government avoids allowing him to have the right to defend himself at trial by spiriting him out of the country again. So this can all go down on Friday. And the motion goes into how they want to transport him securely. And so we'll find out after months. We have to remember here, it's been months since he won the right.
It was April.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was months. April, he was whisked out of the country in March.
Right.
But after his indictment, he was indicted. It became public in June. And not too long after that, the government lost its motion to have him detained before trial. We've had 2 hearings to see if he was some sort of danger to the community or risk of flight. The 2 sets of judges, the magistrate and the district judge, both decided no, there isn't that.
This is the undisputable history here that even Trump can't try to refute. Abrego Garcia, on his civil rights side, on his due process side of the case in front of Judge Zinnes, not only obtained multiple orders in his favor from Judge Zinnes, it was twice affirmed by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. It was affirmed by the United States Supreme Court. It was either 7-2 or 9-0. Which was it?
It was 9-0, I believe.
9-0. Okay, so he's got that on the Zinnes side. On the criminal side, with Judge Crenshaw and Judge Holmes, she refused to detain him pre-trial based on an entire evidentiary hearing in which witnesses testified for the Trump administration, and she completely rejected the Department of Justice's evidence. She called out the fact that investigation that you talked about 3 years after the fact was done over 2 weeks by a guy who was called in specifically to look at the files and find a crime. That's not really how that's supposed to work. So the makings of what Crenshaw's looking at dismissing the indictment, I think were laid by Judge Holmes as the federal magistrate looking at pretrial detention. I thought she did a masterful job, and Crenshaw also. So people that know this, everywhere, every judge that's looked at an issue involving Abrego Garcia, criminal or his constitutional rights, up to the United States Supreme Court, has ruled in his favor every time without exception. The other fact that they can't get around is when he says so powerfully and so heartbreakingly that he was tortured upon arrival in El Salvador, a place he should never have been, a place where he was the administration has to concede was illegally removed there. But the torture that is portrayed in the first couple of pages of the motion, I mean, so like you said, and I said at the top, it's hard to get an indictment dismissed for vindictiveness. But when you've been dealt the cards that this Department of Justice has given you, it's a gift. I mean, you don't normally have a political hack of a Department of Justice, doing Donald Trump's bidding and going after presumed innocent defendants as mercilessly as they did in public. And of course, this is what good defense lawyers are going to do with it. And that's why there's so much buzz around right now when we hear we're going to go. I mean, I just did a hot take on it. We just had Ed Martin, of all people, who couldn't get confirmed as the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, but he is now one of the special attorneys, weaponized attorneys for Pam Bondi, go on Maria Bartiromo, the chief propagandist for the Trump administration, and say out loud that he's not just going to open the investigative file about Letitia James and Adam Schiff about mortgage fraud, which is what the referral was, but he's going to look at every aspect of their life, Maria, because when you're unethical and you commit fraud in one area, you might have committed fraud in another area. Thank you very much for the evidence we need to support vindictive prosecution. That's exactly what you cannot do as a prosecutor, which is to just say, I'm just going to be a proctologist and see what I find. That's not how our Department of Justice works. That's not how our Constitution works. And this is not going to be the last motion for vindictive prosecution brought by the Department of Justice under Trump that you and I are going to talk about, right?
As a matter of fact, I mean, you spoke about a special attorney. There's another special attorney in the District of New Jersey, and this is actually a second vindictive prosecution motion brought. Alina Habba is now facing a selective and vindictive prosecution motion by Congresswoman Lamonica McGiver. You might remember she was the woman who was charged with assaulting law enforcement over a scuffle at a private immigration prison there. And
which she didn't even participate in. She was the scufflee. She wasn't the scuffler.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the heavily edited footage by the Department of Homeland Security, what you see is this sort of melee where the federal agents are trying to arrest New York's mayor in a case that collapsed in embarrassing, humiliating fashion, by the way. And people are getting pushed and shoved into each other. They charge her, and the crux of her motion, it's a fascinating motion. She points out that the treatment of her versus Trump's treatment of hundreds of violent pardoned rioters. And again, we see in both of these vindictive prosecution motions, all of the statements of the Trump administration coming back to haunt them. And with Alina Habba, she goes on a right-wing podcaster's show, Jack Posobiec, and starts talking about how she's going to turn New Jersey red. There's Fox News clips. So usually, as you started off this segment by saying, Michael, these are difficult motions to win. However,
they got a lot
these tests will determine whether they're impossible to win because the government keeps handing evidence of selective and vindictive prosecution on right-wing podcasts, on Fox News, on press conferences. There are footnotes galore in these motions with the citations of each and every time a Trump official is saying, I am going to target so-and-so. And it's really remarkable.
Well, this sloppy conduct, unethical, sloppy criminal conduct by the most corrupt Department of Justice in history, in plain view, at least the Nixon Department of Justice, we didn't know about it until they broke the story in Watergate. But this is in plain view. This is in public sight. The corruption is televised. The corruption is YouTubed and Substacked. And this sloppiness is consistent with Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump and those around him manufactured brand new evidence as trials and indictments were going on. I mean, as I joked, if you were a prosecutor against Donald Trump or you were doing a case against Rudy Giuliani or something, you had to have a wireless printer in the courtroom because you had to be ready to print in real time the thing that Donald Trump just said outside the courtroom at a break. Right. As new evidence in this particular case. And so when you have that kind of stew of a mind operating at the executive branch level and demanding from his departments at every level MAGA fealty and political support at every turn, because that's all the Department of Justice here is. Department of Justice is just a political arm of the Trump administration or Trump organization. That's all they are. But that, okay, if that's what it is, we know the enemy. And if you're the defense lawyers, then you say, bring it, talk more, speak more, social media post more, and you just have an entire team scrubbing speeches and appearances. We do it on Midas Touch and Legal AF, scrubbing speeches and appearances for footnotes to support your argument. And the good news for our audience, I think we'll end it this way, Adam. The good news for our audience is we don't have to worry. Some people say, Popok, Adam, don't tell them. Don't, because they'll stop. They'll fit. Don't worry about it. They're not going to stop. They're not going to fix. They don't think they're doing anything wrong. They're not going to grow a brain in this administration. Everything you're seeing now in the first 7-8 months, we're going to see worse, not better, because they're not going to improve because they don't think they're doing anything wrong.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. So that's good. So so for us, it gives us lots to talk about here. I'm so glad, Adam Klasfeld, that you've joined Legal AF as a regular contributor. Allrise News, can't miss it, everybody. Join allrisenews.com.
That's correct. Thanks.
Allrisenews.com. Substack. We're going to be sliding over Substack in a minute. And then while you're here, of course, hit the subscribe button and help us continue to grow this pro-democracy channel. Until our next reportings together or separately, Adam Klasfeld and Michael Popok reporting. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.